Hi, everyone. I'm Carrie Cassidy from Project CAMELOT and very happy to be here today. So I have a very illustrious guest, in my opinion. He's a real whistleblower, and he's still working for, as far as I know, the secret state, whatever you want to call it, the secret space program. And he works with a group of individuals, and he has done, this is going to be the third interview that we've done with him. And I'm so happy to have you back, Major Berg, and it's Major Solomon Berg for everyone. So why don't you tell us what's been going on with you? I'm not going to presume to say that, so I'd rather that you kind of launch into who you are, why you might have been gone for quite a few months, and what's been going on.
Well, I appreciate your patience. You were the first person I reached out to when I got back. I've had a harrowing time since we last spoke. When we last spoke, it was around September, and I had told you that my comrade in arms, my friend Squatch, the ambassador, was awaiting a rescue ship. Now, I thought this was going to be a simple affair, just a routine contact, diplomatic exchange, and we would transfer the ambassador. But after our last interview, my superiors began to reevaluate my role in the project. They were not pleased with some of the disclosures I made, and I was considered problematic, and I was sent away.
Oh my.
So while the Squatch ship arrived at the International Space Station and the crew was evacuated and replaced by Black Kraken operatives, I was forced on vacation. I was put on sabbatical, so to speak, academic detachment. So in that capacity, I traveled to Papua New Guinea, which is a place where I had studied, where I had studied when I was a student with a tribe called the Kokopelele.
Mm.
And they have a most unique culture, one that is based on initiation through various practical jokes. We would think of it as something akin to hazing. And so as a young anthropologist, well, as a young anthropology student, I was the victim of a number of these harmless pranks perpetrated by the tribe and also by older anthropologists who were in the know. So I revisited my friends in that tribe where I'm considered an honorary member, and I stayed with them for a couple of weeks. And then I moved on to Brazil. And in Brazil, I was involved in some very interesting work that I think you and your listeners would appreciate. So obviously, there are various national branches in the secret space programs. And I am excited to announce that Brazil is proceeding forward with a manned space program of its own. And I was tasked with training the first cadre of Brazilian deep space astronauts in first contact procedures to prepare them for meeting intelligent life throughout the galaxy. So I was specially assigned by President da Silva. It was an honor. It's some of the most incredible practical work I've ever done. Outside of working with Squatch, obviously. But I became aware of something troubling while I was in Brazil. Do you remember that I told you in our last interview that there were beings who claim Anunnaki heritage? And they have different credibility. Some of them may be telling the truth, some of them are lying, and some of them are exaggerating. but there is one who I believe to be a direct descendant of Chrysalix himself. His name is Malchenix, and he is a bounty hunter. He worked for the Bolsonaro government. He slaughtered indigenous activists of the Amazon. And then, through the Dracos, he took out a contract on Squatch. Now, you may be wondering how Malchenix wound up on Earth. I can tell you that he is persona non grata on Mars.
Okay, now I do you mind if I pause you there, because my people that know you through my interviews are going to be, their minds are going to be completely confused as to, because you kind of blew by this rather quickly, this situation in which you were, I guess, moved sideways in the program, or in,
Yes.
you know, secret space program, as we call it.
Series of details.
Okay, but it doesn't, I'm sorry, but if there's more explanation you can give, I am confused. I understand that you might have said some things they didn't want out there or something like that, but your relationship with Squatch, it would have seemed to me to be paramount. In other words, it has to take precedence. Maybe that's just me, because of your unique abilities to communicate with him telepathically. And
They
then
thought I had become too close to my subject.
Sorry?
They thought I had become too close to my subject.
I see. But
They
at
thought
the
I
same
lacked
time,
objectivity, that I lacked clinical or academic detachment.
okay, but you didn't explain. You said he was set to go off planet to be picked up by his comrades. However, you just dropped that. You didn't explain whether it happened, whether it didn't happen. Are you about to go into that? Because I don't.
I am.
Okay.
I am, but the thing you must understand is that I was not there when the ship arrived. I had already been sent away.
Right. Okay.
So I learned all of this through other sources later. So I'm attempting to describe events I did not directly witness.
Okay.
The protocol for an event such as this is that when an extraterrestrial spacecraft from a relatively new civilization arrives, the International Space Station is prepared by being evacuated by its regular personnel and replaced with specialists. In this case, it was Black Kraken operatives. These were my comrades. These were people I knew, and they later shared this information with me. But I did not go to the ISS at that time. I did not go to the ISS until several months later, when I came back to the United States after my time in Brazil. Okay,
but wouldn't Squatch have objected to this change? And wouldn't, and is there anyone else besides you that is able to communicate with Squatch? Because that would seem to be, even if they wanted to do that, it seems like, why wouldn't they have you accompany him to leave the planet? You know,
well, they did, but they weren't sure they were going to allow that at first. They eventually did, but they were weighing the pros and cons of that for a while they sent me away. The issue, so the Squatches, I was in touch with the ambassador through the Overmind, as I am in touch with all Squatches. You know, the ones on Earth are easier for me to commune with directly. But I'm also aware of Squatches on other planets. And at various times, due to the alignments of these planets and other astral factors, the connection may be stronger or weaker. But the ambassador and I do not any longer require any kind of physical proximity in order to maintain our link. And this is true for any two close individuals in Squatch society. So they don't put the same emphasis on physical proximity as we would. Now, they do have a language of their own that is not telepathic. It is used pretty much only in diplomatic and trade circumstances because of their overmind connection, enabling them to communicate more efficiently with each other. But they are capable of using spoken language, and there is kind of a pidgin that they speak.
Okay, so I'll let you continue, since this seems to kind of like go forward and then back, and maybe, you know, you're going to tie it all together. So I'll save any further questions for a bit later.
Yeah, so I was recalled after my work in Brazil, and at that point I did go with Squatch. There was a decision made with my input and Squatch's input about where we were going to go, because the Squatches knew that they were being tracked by Malchenix, and we had to mislead Malchenix. And because Malchenix is persona non grata on Mars for his role in a failed coup against Supreme Technocrat David Bowie, he could not follow us to Mars. So I went on the Squatch ship to Mars, and on Mars we landed that ship and we cloaked it and left the ship. And at that point, I thought the only logical thing to do, being that we were out in the middle of the desert with only what we could carry on our backs, was reach out to an old comrade, Drews, the leader of the Martian lizards that I spoke with you about in our last interview. So finding Drews wasn't difficult. He tends to be attracted to stragglers, and we were stragglers, strangers in a strange land. Drews was quick to find us. Squatch was new to him. Their species were unfamiliar with each other. So, of course, Squatch had to fight Drews, which meant that Squatch donned the tail, the mechanical tail, the same one I had worn in my combat ritual with Drews. And once they fought and cemented those bonds, they shared water, and the Squatches, the ambassador and the rescue team that accompanied him, were adopted into the tribe, much as I had been all those years ago.
Okay, you're using the word Squatches with an S. Was there more than one Squatch in attendance at that point from the ship?
Oh, yes.
How
there
many?
were at least 12 of them.
Oh, wow.
They are, so the ship that came for Squatch is a special kind of ship. It's a ship operates, we would classify it as sort of a corvette. It's operated by a crack team of Squatch commandos who specialize in retrieval missions. They locate stranded Squatches on backward planets like ours. They swoop in and they rescue the younglings. And they've been doing this for years, and they're very, very good at it. And every member of the team has their own specialty. It was really amazing to watch them work in concert, because, like I said, they don't talk much among themselves. They're relatively quiet. They communicate on a mental level, and that enables them to function almost like a beehive. And so I traveled with them on their ship, which had a much, much superior propulsion system to the Earth ships I've been on. And we reached Mars in only a matter of days.
Okay. So you had these two cultures meet, and they allowed you to ride with Squatch, even though you had gone down to Brazil and you were in a situation where you had to, I assume, come back from Brazil to the place where you would take off from here to meet the ship, and the ship docks at the space station. Is this what you're saying?
Yes, it was docked at the space station. What they did was they shuttled the regular crew off. They put Black Kraken in. And then at the point that I was recalled after my time in Brazil, I was taken actually to Russia, well, not the former Soviet Union, to Baikonur Cosmodrome. And I was launched up in a Soyuz capsule because, you know, the ISS still makes regular use of Soyuz capsules. This was considered an efficient way to transport me since it was just me at that point. I linked up with the rest of Black Kraken at the ISS, and I was transferred to the Squatch ship along with my assistant, Daniel Jordan, and my bodyguard, Fiona Celine.
Okay. So what happened once these cultures met? And I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, so this interaction on Mars, was this a planned part of the journey? So it wasn't planned that they were just going to pick up Squatch and take him to their planet. Why was there a detour made to Mars?
Because on Mars, it was considered an advantageous place to hide from the bounty hunter Malchenix.
And how does
status on Mars, his legal status?
Okay, but then can you explain a little bit more about Malchenix? Is that how you say the name?
Yes.
Okay, can you explain more about, is this an isolated individual? Is this in a group? And what does he look like? What is his physicality? Is it normally human looking, or does he shapeshift? What is his race, his real race or species?
His species is Anunnaki, more or less. He's not pure Anunnaki, although he would claim he is, which contradicts his other claim that he is a direct descendant of Chrysalix, who is half human. He holds about a dozen aristocratic titles and is connected with what I call the Anunnaki organization. And that is to say, they are a nationalistic and civic organization dedicated to the preservation of the Anunnaki people and the furtherance of their interests.
Okay, and when you refer to the Anunnaki, are you referring to the Zachariah Sitchin reference to that species, that race of beings?
A branch of them, yes.
Okay, and
this particular branch has formed the Anunnaki organization, which is to say not all Anunnaki.
okay, what's the other part?
Well, they're not aligned with that organization. It's a little bit like it would be stereotypical to assume that all Italian Americans are part of Cosa Nostra. It's similar with the Anunnaki organization.
Okay, but what I was really asking is, you're suggesting they're not pure Anunnaki, meaning Anunnaki from Nibiru, I assume. But what I'm asking is, what is the other racial composition of their tribe or their species? In other words, what beings?
Individual and family, but Draco and human are among them.
Okay, so Draco and human, they're hybrid.
The Anunnaki that you know of are in fact the descendants of a conquered people. The Draco, as I've mentioned before, practice a kind of genetic assimilation. So the Anunnaki originally were much more humanoid.
Yes, I'm aware of that.
Anunnaki, like Malchenix in our time, have many reptilian characteristics. Malchenix, and I don't know if this is his natural appearance or if he has augmented himself in some way. I would suspect he has. He has essentially half a human face and the other half of his face is distorted, grotesque reptilian. I think he modified himself this way in order to set people off somewhat, in order to kind of hold the room, you know, captivate people. It's a very striking appearance. He's extremely tall. He wears very ornate clothing to signify his social status. And he lays claim to about a dozen titles, such as Grand Huntsman of the Orion Fields.
Well, but is this an individual that is walking around here on Earth, and specifically it sounded like in Brazil? So is he visible to the other humans in his presence, or is he sequestered in some way?
Well, he does have a personal cloaking device he uses tactically, but yeah, he is physical, material being. Certainly, he also exists on some trans-dimensional spiritual plane as an entity of pure consciousness, but so do you and so do I.
Right. Okay. Now, I know that I tend to ask a lot of questions, so I want to allow you to go through your story, you know, so it sort of holds together. So if we can go back to the place where and I have very many questions, so I assume you'll let me ask those questions after you're done. But could you tell us the saga of how they came down in the ship or to the space station? How, if you were present when Squatch was reunited with his comrades, and maybe continue from there, and then how you went to Mars and so on and so forth.
I was not present when he was actually reunited with them.
Okay.
I had been sent away shortly before the Squatch ship arrived. And when I came back, the Squatches were still present at the ISS. They had delayed waiting for me because they refused to leave unless I left with them.
Wow.
That was the culmination of a conflict that was not fought literally, but a conflict over me that I was not personally present for. So by the time I came back from Brazil, and they sent me to Baikonur Cosmodrome, and I went up in a Soyuz, the diplomatic process had already concluded. There had been a perfunctory cultural exchange. The Squatches were less interested in diplomacy than we humans were. And there are reasons for that.
They were less interested in, I'm sorry, in, what was that word that you used?
Diplomacy.
Oh, diplomacy. Okay, I didn't catch that. All right.
So the Squatches were polite, but it was clear they didn't have much interest in Earth other than me and Black Kraken, because we were aware of the Squatches and by extension the rest of the secret space program, but they weren't particularly interested in forming any kind of treaties or long-term diplomatic relations. They wanted the ambassador, and they wanted me, at least temporarily, so that I could help them hide on Mars.
Okay. Now, can you explain why is this, Menichen, why is he a threat? I mean, in what way? Melchenix, I'm sorry. So in what way is he a threat? Can you explain that? Because, you know, dynamics wise, in other words, is this a chase scene? Should we visualize as kind of a chase scene? Does he get into some kind of vehicle in order to apprehend the Squatches?
He has the ship in which he had it hidden on Earth.
Okay.
It's mantis shaped somewhat. very fluid, organic, artificially intelligent. It's well armed, but it's small. It's a scout ship, and it's operable by him alone. He can use it as a single person. He does have a crew composed of trogs that he uses for boarding operations when he attempts to capture another spacecraft. He would describe himself as a hunter. We would call him a bounty hunter or a contract killer, depending on the specifications of the job. When I first became aware of him, it was stories I heard in my time on Mars back in 2010, 2011, when I was studying there. I learned that shortly before I had arrived, there had been an attempted coup against Bowie, the Bowie government. And the perpetrator of that coup was Malchenix, who attempted to establish an authoritarian regime. But this was soundly rejected by the Martian populace. Now, Mars today, as opposed to when I spent my year there, there's much less fighting. It's much less militarized now. But back then, they had just formed the national government. They had just had elections. It was a much less stable situation that Malchenix intruded upon. And I would say Mars survived that coup with grace. And as a result, Malchenix was banished from Mars. So he came to Earth, where he worked as a contract killer and a bounty hunter. Specifically in Brazil, officially he worked for the logging corporations, but unofficially he worked for Bolsonaro.
Okay. Now, okay. So can you explain again? You had this there was this meeting took place when they arrived, or you all arrived in your ship, right, on Mars, on the surface of Mars, and there was with this Druze being. And can you re-describe for us what the physicality is of Druze and his group?
Well, Druze's people are reptilian. They are an offshoot of the Draco species, but they are not high caste Draco. Their ancestors were mutants and criminals, deformed individuals. So there's much more kind of unstable genetic variation in Druze's people. Some of them have horns, some of them have a smoother, scaly texture to their skin. Their color ranges from orange to mottled brown and green. They can have spiky faces or smooth faces. Some of them have kind of a double rowed chin, beard of spikes. But they have evolved over the years into somewhat more compact forms than their ancestors due to the nature of their survival in the Martian deserts. They also
are you saying they're not as tall? Maybe
no, they're not as tall. They're smaller, and they are warm-blooded,
Well,
much like dinosaurs.
Isn't that a big switch, or
Well, not so much. If you look at reptile evolution on Earth, there's a lot of interesting things that reptiles and reptile-like species do. So, for example, some species are capable of reproducing bimodally, asexually, sexually, laying eggs, giving live birth. There's all sorts of interesting things about lizard genetics.
Okay. Would you consider yourself an expert on that?
Not to the degree that I am an expert on hominids and primates, but I would say I know my lizards.
Okay. All right. So are you, I don't mean again to be interrupting here, but I know you're having some trouble and I want to be, sensitive to that. So you have been ill and it's okay to say that, I'm assuming, right?
Yes. So I don't know where exactly it happened, if this was when I was in Brazil and I spent some time in the Amazon with the people that Malchenix was hunting, or if it happened later after I returned to Earth. But I was envenomed by a reptile.
What do you mean by that? You were bitten? Is that what you're trying to say?
I believe so. It's a slow-acting poison. I do believe Malchenix is responsible, that he mind-controlled this small animal. I don't blame the creature.
Okay. And this happened while you were on Mars? Or you don't know?
No, it couldn't have happened on Mars. It either had to have happened when I was in the Amazon or after I came back from Mars, because I had to come back. I couldn't come back from Mars through official channels. After spending, well, so let me back up, because we're moving forward, and I don't want to skip what happened on Mars.
Okay.
Because I was on Mars for several months. I would say from mid-May until beginning of June, when I returned and contacted you. That it's hard to keep track of time there. The days are not the same. But while living with Drew's people, Drews and the Squatches embarked on an epic water quest. And as part of this water quest, we raided the labyrinth at the heart of the holy city of Zaxxon and stole the Lotus crystal. And with the Lotus crystal, we were able to stop an interdimensional incursion by wraiths from a layer of hell accessible by a portal inside the center of Mars. We had to seal that portal with the Lotus crystal, and only then was I able to return to Earth.
Okay, so this is the first we're hearing, I think, of the Lotus crystal. Can you give us some background on that?
You really had to be there. It's hard to explain because it's not a crystal in the physical sense. It's more of a spiritual construct. And you can't carry it. You can only lure it. You have to sing to it and tell it stories and feed it. It's a kind of benevolent, emotional, vampiric matrix. I'm sorry, I'm going to sound like a babbling idiot if I try to explain this any further. I'm not a theologian.
You're not what?
I don't know if, I'm not a theologian, and I don't know if the events that I experienced in the holy city and at the center of Mars were metaphysically real in the materialist philosophical sense, or if this was some kind of spiritual experience that I achieved through the overmind. I was not the only one who experienced these events. There's a collective memory of it held by myself, the Squatches, Drews, and Drews' people.
Okay, are the Drews telepathic as well?
They are capable of telepathy with other reptilian beings, as I am capable of telepathy with other placental mammals. So, for example, they have to be telepathically guarded against individuals like Malchenix, who have Anunnaki DNA because of the telepathic cortex of the Anunnaki. but the telepathic cortex of the Anunnaki is part of their reptilian DNA. It's not the same telepathic cortex as exists in our physiology and in the physiology of similar hominid life forms like the Squatches.
So this experience that you had, and it would appear that the Druze group had it at, I'm assuming the Druze group were also participating, as well as the Squatches, or
Yes, the
was this
Lotus
exclusive?
crystal doesn't recognize differences in physiology. It affects all beings equally.
Okay, so this was a group experience, is what you're saying?
Yes, a collective memory, one that is both verbal and ideal and also spiritual.
Okay, and in terms of time, did it take a long time? Was this, did it seem to go on for many days or even months?
It seemed like it took a very long time, but I suspect it actually, it was neurologic brain time. It was a series probably of rapid eye movements to the outside observer. If in fact, my hunch of invalidating its metaphysical reality is on target. Other than that, I have no explanation for it.
Okay, so you went into the center of Mars and opened a portal.
Device.
Sorry?
Using a Trog tunneling device, we reached the center of Mars.
Okay, but the Trogs
Are almost extinct.
are what?
They're almost extinct. There are very, very few Trog hives left.
Okay, but my understanding is the Trogs are not a positive, whatever you want to call it, a positively oriented species.
Well, they are hostile to humans on Mars because humans have encroached on their territory. I would not say they are not a positively oriented species. I don't know every Trog.
Okay, but in terms, you're saying you used a Trog technical device or whatever to go down into the center of Mars, correct?
Yes, we hijacked it.
Oh, really? Oh, so it wasn't like a friendly sharing situation.
It was war booty. It was captured long ago by the residents of the Holy City.
Okay, so can you just briefly, are the Trogs insectoids? I can't remember.
Yes, they are insectoids. And they were for a long time in conflict with the Martian reptoids, Druze's people. But over the years, the Trog queens have been dying off. They've been slowly starved of water. And there are very few Trog hives left. And sometimes you'll find wild Trogs without a queen. But without a queen, they're essentially mindless animals.
Okay, and are these the large, they're like large, right? They're 6 feet or larger?
In many cases, yes, their size varies, and there are some smaller castes in their society, in their social hierarchy is caste-based. They are capable of engineering themselves into various forms that mimic the use of technology. So the Trog tunneling device we used was, in essence, a Trog itself, but one that had been captured and domesticated by the residents of the Holy City.
Well, how did that, okay, and let me just interject here because Randy Kramer, I believe, the super soldier, the Marine, yes. I think you're familiar with him. I think he said that he's spent a lot of time battling the Trogs on, and I think maybe the Reptilians as well, on Mars.
Yes, he did when he was there. I was there much later than him. So both times I went to Mars, I wasn't there at the same time as Randy. Randy's older than me. Randy visited Mars at a time when the Trogs were much more numerous and active.
Okay. So
It's
how,
believed
when,
that humans have seized a lot of the large water deposits under the Martian surface. And so the trog queens haven't been able to, they have these massive brains that require a lot of hydration. And that, without a constant water supply, they can't maintain themselves. So then the colony, it's colony collapse, like with bees.
okay, how did you use a trog as a vehicle to go into inner Mars?
This particular trog was genetically engineered to carry other smaller trogs. It was a kind of troop transport.
So did you and the 12 or, I guess 13 if you add Squatch.
And Daniel Jordan.
Okay, your assistant. And what about the Reptilians, Drews and his group?
Well, there's a core group of about 20 warriors that accompany Drews on the water quest.
Okay.
Those are the warriors he holds in highest esteem. I don't believe there's any such thing as a true meritocracy. The Reptoids believe somewhat differently, and they believe they have a true meritocracy, as many groups believe they have a true meritocracy, when in fact they do not. But I was a guest, and I wasn't there to debate politics with them.
Sure. So, but all of you, did you all go on the same transport, or did they go in a different way?
We went on the same transport. That transport, it can hold up to about 50 Trog soldiers.
Okay, so did you go, because I don't know if you're familiar with Radu Sinamar, the Romanian Sphinx, and those stories that have to do with going into inner Earth through these tunnels. At a certain point in those stories, what happens is they have vehicles that go a certain distance, and then at a certain point, they kind of go through you might say a frequency fence or something, and they actually are going to some degree what I might call interdimensional. So they're changing dimensions along the road to go deeper into inner Earth.
There was a similar process in inner Mars.
Okay. Right. So
a hierarchy of dimensional levels, thresholds, which we had to meet in order to progress further toward the center. Had we not done that, had we not traversed the spiritual plane as well as the material plane, we would not even have been able to perceive the portal.
Right. So it is very similar. Okay. So you went, you had taken this construct, which is a crystal, as you called it, a crystal, into the center of Mars. And what did you do at that point? Do you know?
We dropped it into the portal and we ran, and we didn't look back.
Oh. And what?
Back into the tunneler, and we ascended to the surface as quickly as possible.
And what was that supposed to achieve, or what did it achieve?
You do not want to get caught by a Mars wraith.
A Mars what?
Wraith. A demon.
Uh-huh. Okay. So what does that got to do with this crystal going into the portal?
To seal the portal, to prevent the demons from encroaching any further on Mars.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if Earth has a hell, Carrie, but Mars has one.
I see. Okay, well, there is what are called the halls of Amenti inside Earth. Are you familiar with that?
No.
Okay.
Earth is not my area of expertise.
All right. So there are similar things that have to go on with opening and closing portals and so on. Of course, CERN has opened a portal that goes to the Draco galaxy. I assume you know that.
Yes, and in fact, some of the weapons on Malchenik's ship are essentially small CERN reactors.
So he can open portals using that for space travel. Is that correct?
Yes, if he so desired, he could fire a portal at a ship.
Okay. But Portals
They're used as
are like doorways.
as well as
So-
weapons.
Okay, sorry.
They're useful for transportation as well as weapons.
Oh, all right. Well, my understanding, a portal is kind of a doorway, and that it then leads to a wormhole, right?
In most cases, yes.
Okay. But you're saying it could be more solidified and used as a weapon.
Yes, it is possible to build a device, a kind of projector that weaponizes a wormhole. It can be done in several ways. One could fire micro singularities at a ship, which would essentially slice that ship, similar to the effect of an anti-proton beam. Or one could open a portal to a hostile dimension and rely on the forces of that dimension for offensive utility. This variant also is used as a device on Malchanic's ship. He can literally fire demons at you.
Okay, when you're using the word demon, what are you talking about? What is that description?
A wraith, an interdimensional entity dedicated to pure chaos, a being with a complex and inhuman morality that is essentially anti-life.
All right, so you're saying some of these demons, as you're calling them, came in through a portal in the center of Mars. You guys went to close it. In theory, you were successful. But prior to that, a certain amount of demons, as you call them, again, must have gotten in. Don't they only operate, though, in the interdimensional sector? They don't actually materialize necessarily, or do they just temporarily materialize and then dematerialize?
They can materialize, but they sacrifice some of their longevity when they do so. They can take material form, and it may be strategically advantageous for them to do so, but it's not a condition they can step back from. Once they take material form, they cannot transcend again.
Okay, so they can, in essence, be demolished or killed.
Yes.
Okay, and have you, or Drews, or even the Sasquatches, have they used weaponry to kill some of the demons, or to destroy them or dematerialize them?
Oh, yes. And in that form, they're susceptible to any number of weapons, which would kill a human or a Squatch or a Draco.
Right. Okay. And would they all look the same, or would they take different form?
The demons?
Yes.
They can take almost any form you can imagine, and they prefer to take the most unlikely forms.
Okay. All right. So you went into and had this sort of hyper real experience in which you were in this sort of quest that you participated in, and so did Squatch and the ambassador and his group. And
yes, I don't want to make it sound like it was just me who sealed the portal. It was a team effort.
Right. Okay, I understand. So when you did that, obviously you were sent on that mission. Was there somebody who sent you on that mission? Was this a voluntary kind of a situation, or was it something that just emerged? Did someone call to you for your assistance?
Encountered refugees from the Holy City stranded in the desert who had been attacked by demons.
Okay.
Drews took pity on them.
And therefore conceived this idea?
He thought it appropriate for a water quest.
Okay.
A heroic feat.
So you were successful. Then what happened?
Well, after sealing the portal, we could focus on getting Squatch off planet again. So we had by that point trekked all over the Martian surface and circled back to the cloaked ship, successfully having eluded Malchenik scanners. The Squatches boarded the ship, but I stayed behind, still in contact with them through the overmind, of course, so that I could monitor their escape. Drews and I trekked to the nearest military base. He gave me some supplies and I parted ways with him. But what happened on the Squatch ship was that they fled Malcheniks. Now, remember when we last spoke, I mentioned that the Squatch ship had gotten here following a warp corridor. It was a kind of opportunistic faster than light method. There are many different ways to travel faster than light, and Squatches prefer to use all of them, whatever is most efficient at the moment. So there are a number of vortices and quantum fissures and portals in the solar system that are regular routes for spacecraft. And the Squatch ship programmed a course for one of these that was close to the orbit of Mars. Unfortunately, they had to decloak in order to reach maximum velocity and use the drive. So that left them vulnerable, and Malchenik's scout ship picked up on their sensor profile and gave chase. So at that point, Malchenik's scout ship was firing its weapons at the Squatch ship, which destabilized the matter-antimatter reactor on board the Squatch vessel. And that's a very large and cumbersome piece of equipment that our ambassador and the Squatch tactical officer actually had to free climb in order to restabilize the system with a dark matter pellet. So during that free climb, the Squatch tactical officer was seriously injured, and the ambassador had to take over his duties. So he fixed the reactor and rushed to the gun station and fired a maser beam at Malchenik's ship. And that maser beam happened to strike the portal generator, and that caused a cascade reaction that exploded Malchenik's ship. But after Malchenik's was destroyed, it wasn't long before the Draco Man-O-War appeared. Now, a Draco Man-O-War is an immense battlecraft. Huge, just continent-sized. And very heavily armed, but not small and nimble enough to use the vortex like the Squatch Corvette. So the Squatches were able to escape just in the nick of time. They jumped into that vortex and hit their FTL drive, and now they are safe in the Andromeda Galaxy.
Okay, now is that where their planet is, or are you at liberty to say where their planet is?
Well, I believe I've already explained they don't have a planet to call their own. They could settle somewhere, but in the past that hasn't worked out very well, because usually someone else comes along, and the Squatches are, in the past, they've been very generous and shared a lot with other civilizations, but the reactionary conservative elements in those civilizations always turned against them.
Do you know why that is? And by the way, I do remember you saying they were somewhat nomadic, that was their kind of way.
Yes. Well, the reason, because people fear progress, and it doesn't matter whether we're talking about Earth or Mars or any other civilization in the galaxy. Whenever women and minorities and marginalized people make progress in society, there is usually a strong reactionary backlash against progress that the mainstream establishment solidifies around. So it's a historical dialectic that has transpired time and time again across many millions of years on millions of planets, that when the dominant group feels threatened by minority progress, it seeks a scapegoat. And the Squatches on so many planets have been that scapegoat, because they shared what they had, because they shared the benefits of their wisdom and their technology.
Okay. Now, people that are listening to this, yeah, you know, I think they need to keep up with the narrative to really understand what you're talking about all this time, and they would need the backlog as well. Now, in essence, you're telling us that Squatch is safe. He's back with his people.
Yes.
They are somewhere temporarily, maybe in the Andromeda galaxy that is relatively more benign and friendly as well to us, as it happens, as far as I know. The Andromedans are, you know, through one of our whistleblowers.
There are many species in Andromeda, but they are mostly uninvolved in the political affairs of the Milky Way. Okay,
now there is said to be, and Alex Collier was the name, he's a person that does deal with the Andromedans on a regular basis. You may be familiar with him, but at any rate, what happens is I was told there's a major war going on in the Orion galaxy, that humans, and they gave me some kind of number, I think it was something like 100,000 or more, have been recruited to actually and taken over to that area of the Orion galaxy to participate in the war. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, I'm familiar because I've seen the logistics records of troop movements. I've seen the records of the deployments of ships.
Okay. Now, what did you do? So you actually got the help of the Russians, used one of their craft to come back from Mars. Is that correct?
Well, no, well, yes, but also I couldn't have gotten back to Earth from Mars on one of those Russian craft. I had to sneak aboard an automated freighter, which was actually a German craft, a contractor ship, one of the German corporations, very minimally crewed. The systems are automated, so there's just a few attendants, and it's a very voluminous ship. So I didn't really run into any of the attendants. I was able to make a life for myself as it was in the cargo bay, eating out of cans for the couple of weeks that it took to shuttle me back to the ISS. But at the ISS, I had to figure out a way to return to Earth. And fortunately, there is pretty much always at least one Soyuz vessel attached to the ISS to be used as an escape craft in case of an emergency. So I was able to commandeer that Soyuz and took that into low orbit and on a descent trajectory. And that's how I ended up in the Canadian wilderness, where that is where I believe that I was envenomed.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Now, the Soyuz ship, does it, you know how Elon Musk uses old technology, these so-called rockets and so on and so forth?
Yeah, he thinks he's the great innovator, but he's not.
Right, I know that, and it's absurd. Well, it's a misdirect for humans, but at any rate, the one thing that his ships supposedly do is they're able to land, you know, like upright or come back to Earth. Is the Soyuz ships, do they have that same capability? Can they
No.
hover?
No, I returned to Earth in much the same way as astronauts did in the 1960s.
Oh,
and
right.
it was parachuting in a capsule.
Okay, that's insane. Into the water?
Not the water. I didn't hit the water. I hit the woods.
Oh,
It was extremely physically uncomfortable because I didn't have the benefit of a pressure chamber or decontamination procedures. So it was a grueling physical experience, but I managed to reconstitute myself somehow.
okay. Now, what about your assistant? Did you leave with him?
Daniel Jordan stayed on Mars.
Okay.
He stayed with Fiona.
Remind
He
me,
looked after the strays.
who's Fiona again?
Fiona Celine, my bodyguard.
Oh, really? Okay. And what kind of being is Fiona?
Well, Fiona, she has human DNA as well as the DNA of several feline species, both native to Earth and extraterrestrial. She is a felinoid chimera.
Okay.
One could say she's a child of many worlds.
All right. But I'm perplexed because you say it takes many weeks to get back from Mars. My understanding is that the Venture Star, I think it's called, that is kept in around Utah and Dugway, under the ground, that we've been told about by
The X-Craft.
what?
The X-Craft.
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
The successor, you're talking about the successor to the space shuttle?
Well, it's a, you know, it's sort of slightly triangular.
Yes.
It's called the Venture Star. Okay, but it goes to Mars in, if I understand it, a matter of hours. And there's also other ways to get to Mars, even through portals. So I want to understand why it is you would take sort of the long way, if you will.
Well, the ore freighter that I took doesn't go directly from Mars to Earth. It makes several stops along the way at space stations.
Space stations that we're not aware of.
Yes. Well, that you're not aware of.
Right. Well, that humans, you know, generally speaking, the general populace are not aware of.
Well, they're military space stations. They're crewed by human military, as well as some of them have Raptor crews and some of them have Draco crews.
Okay, now, are you friendly? Are you considered a friendly? So they allow you to come dock and so on?
Well, my presence wasn't known at that time. I was hiding on the freighter.
Oh, right.
I snuck on board. I was not an official passenger. It's not a passenger ship.
Okay. Can you describe it when you say freighter? What does it look like?
It looks like you would imagine a space freighter. It's not built for any kind of atmospheric flight. You have to shuttle up to it. It is long and blocky. It's a little, imagine the, kind of picture the Discovery from 2001 and add more cargo containers, and that's pretty much it. It's not a high-end ship.
Transport vehicle type of thing.
Yes, it's not a high-end ship. It's not a warship. It didn't have any, well, it did have weapons, but these were just what we call anti-meteoroid guns. They weren't really combat-grade weaponry. They were more for point defense against space debris.
Okay, now, since you have left and you landed sort of in a very awkward way in the Canadian Rockies, I assume, right? And
Yes.
weren't your people tracking you, trying to assist you, so-and-so?
Well, by that point, not that I was aware of this, because I had to reestablish contact with civilization before I became aware of this. But in my absence, Black Kraken had been decommissioned, and all of my comrades were arrested and faced lifelong imprisonment, and I was a wanted man. So when I did return to Earth, after reconstituting myself in the wilderness, I sought out the assistance of a Squatch healer. Now, I have mentioned this individual to you before. I had to travel quite a way to reach him. And I did that by hopping trains, sleeping in ditches and under bridges. But I reached the Wizard of Washington.
Okay, so you went from the Canadian Rockies to you're talking about the west coast of Canada, right?
Yes.
Okay. And again, I'm going to ask you because I don't quite understand the dynamics here, but wouldn't the secret space program, military, or however they are constituted, be trying to track you and your progress regardless? I mean, I don't know if
they've tried.
Okay, but you're not chipped or whatever kind of thing, or you have, what do you have, a cloaking device?
I extracted it myself.
What?
I extracted it myself.
Oh, all right. Okay.
I can't be tracked, at least not through any of the means you're thinking of. They would have to go much lower tech to track me.
Okay. So you connected with this healer. At that point, you were already had contacted some kind of sickness through some kind of type of a reptile that had bitten you, right? A small creature here on Earth.
Yes, and I had also in several small towns sought the assistance of human medical personnel. They all told me I had COVID, which I thought was ridiculous. I mean, I understand why they say that. They had me identify a number of symptoms, but I knew that I hadn't really been, you know, I was coming out of the wilderness. I hadn't been in contact with anyone, so it couldn't have been COVID. I did have the loss of taste and smell, and I experienced a high fever, but I know reptilian venom. Like I said, Carrie, I know my lizards.
Right.
And there were other symptoms that are a little bit too graphic for me to go into that were a dead giveaway that this wasn't COVID. So I went to all these doctors.
Did you have any bite marks?
Yes. And I showed them to the doctors and they told me it was just a harmless bat. But I just knew something was
you know, this is going to sound a little strange, but one of my whistleblowers has a lot of contact with various ET races. Yes. And he has kind of talked about this kind of thing.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not surprised someone else who has experience with ET species is familiar with this. I don't think the doctors that I happened to find had any experience with ET species. When I did go to the Wizard of Washington, finally, we communed, and he told me that due to my physiology, he could not treat me and that I needed to see a human doctor. So I was getting the medical runaround even from a Squatch healer.
Oh.
But he did tell me that if I managed to devise a self-administered treatment, he would monitor it. So I did.
Can you describe that treatment at all? I mean, wouldn't it have to do with somehow extracting the remaining venom out of your system somehow?
Well, the way that the molecules of this venom are structured, you can't really do that. They have a kind of a sickle hook. But what I was able to do was involving a blood donation, blood transfer from a Squatch individual. And so allowing some of the Squatch immune cells to replicate within my system began to fight off some of the poison. But in order to really give it the best chances we could, I had to undergo more extreme procedures, which involved 5-day-long medically induced comas and a number of hallucinogenic drugs.
Okay. But
So I
okay.
spent the last several weeks in either unconscious or often in an altered state of consciousness.
Okay, so can you describe the Wizard of Washington a bit? Is this a traditional Squatch, or is this some kind of hybrid?
Yes, he's traditional. He doesn't shave. He has gray hair. Thick, shaggy gray hair. He looks he's tall, much taller than the ambassador because he's older. And even though he's older, his musculature is denser. He's a broader individual than the ambassador.
Okay, now how tall? What is tall? When you're talking about tall, are you talking 9 feet? Are you talking 6, 8 feet? You're talking 12 feet, or what are you talking?
In the case of the wizard, we're talking about 10 feet.
Okay. Now, where does he lodge himself? Where is he? Is he in hiding in the woods?
Yes, he is nomadic. Even though he is called the Wizard of Washington, his range extends beyond the Washington region. He is nomadic like other male Squatches. He will at times settle and build a type of hut structure, but he usually moves on. He practices limited agriculture, squash and beans. He'll grow those in small rows outside his hut.
Is he having other human contact, or is he isolated?
Mostly isolated, but he has, of course, interacted somewhat with, minimally with humans over the years. Every once in a while, there's a friendly human that forms a familiarity with a particular Squatch. Maybe they leave gifts for the Squatch, or they engage in some kind of basic or symbolic trade, drawing pictures in the dirt or on rocks. A Squatch will come along and draw something on a rock using a bit of charcoal, and a human child will come along a week later and complete the picture. It's interesting, the way these mutualisms develop outside the context of the state.
Sure. Okay, now, so we're with you on your journey, and you've contacted the Wizard of Washington. Somehow you got another Squatch to contribute their blood, I assume, to you to put you into some kind of better immunity towards this venom. And then at what point did you have to leave that situation and go into this where you said you're getting access to hallucinogenic drugs, et cetera? Did you go back into human society at that point, or how?
No, I did at times. I would, on the weekends when I was lucid for that little window of time, I would go into town and charge my phone and go online and check in with things. But for most of the week, I was in the wizard's hut, where I self-administered the blood transfusions, and I ingested medicinal narcotics that he supplied. These are actually from seeds that Squatch brought here. And spores that Squatch has brought here. They make a kind of spore impregnated pitch gum that is mildly hallucinogenic. So it's like a gum, you chew it, But the juice that it releases, mixes with your saliva to create a powerful hallucinogen. And the effect of that hallucinogen is to put you in a state where it's easy for someone to take you through guided visualized meditation through an internal construct of your own physiology. So you can consciously interact with yourself on a microscopic level and manage, involuntary functions voluntarily. It's a strange state to be in. It's almost like if you were shrinking yourself down to a little homunculus and crawling around in your own body.
Right. So then you're able to sort of monitor and also maybe command certain healing.
But you have to be careful because this drug also allows you to talk to the dead, and that can be really distracting.
I can imagine. Okay, so now
not necessarily dead people you knew, just dead people.
Okay. But what about at that point where you tracked? I mean, what I'm trying to kind of, because we're taking a while, and I know that people won't watch more than 2 hours. So I want to kind of keep this.
And my time may be running out. I don't know if in the long term the treatments will have been entirely successful or if they've only delayed the inevitable. It's a possibility I have to consider that this might be our final interview.
Oh, all right. Well, I certainly hope not. Can you tell me how you got back in touch? Because I'm assuming under the circumstances, you're back sort of in the secret space program. You're saying the Kraken were arrested. Were they actually thrown in prison and left there? Or what is the status of the whole situation?
I would imagine they're probably in some kind of detention facility. I haven't been in contact with anyone. I suspect that my superior, Lionel Sperlinghetti, the colonel, is dead, or he would have contacted me by now. I know the man. If he were alive, I would have heard from him. So I can only reason that he's dead, and I am the last member of Black Kraken still in the wild. Now, after living in the woods for a number of weeks and stumbling out back into civilization, it was relatively easy for me to find a way to fit in at a convention, a health convention for naturalists. And that's where I've been for the last few days.
Okay, but you have communicated with me, you were in a state where you weren't well. So all I'm saying is that, again, here you are on a public forum kind of thing.
Yes.
So the secret space program would definitely be aware of you, been tracking you at a certain point from that point on, especially once you joined this health group or whatever you're saying.
I'm here under a false name, as you can see.
Right.
I'm here under the name Barry Creed.
Okay, but even so, the surveillance state is really extensive. You're not, what are you trying to say? Are you saying that they don't know where you are and I do? What are you saying?
I'm sure they'll find out where I am soon. I'm sure they will come for me. And after that, I don't know what will happen. I imagine they will lock me up.
Okay, but that it hasn't happened yet. So you didn't have any, maybe this is private, but you don't have any contacts within, even besides the Kraken, that are in theory.
Not anymore.
Western. Okay.
I'm totally cut off.
Okay, now do you feel, generally speaking, because maybe this is by virtue of being exposed to a lot of hallucinogenics or whatever you want to say, narcotics, then you may not know, but you also may know, you may not know the logistics of the practical world, but in terms of non-practical things, you are still in telepathic, I'm assuming, with this, you know, with Squatch and the ambassador, even though he's off planet. Is that correct?
Yes, our connection is still maintained due to our emotional intimacy, even though he is in another galaxy.
So,
I'm also quite close with the wizard at this point.
okay. So are you considering yourself protected in some form or fashion?
No, I don't think that I am. I think that in revealing myself like this, I'm making myself vulnerable. I don't really care anymore. I want them to come for me. I want an end to this. If I'm gonna die, I'd rather I die among human beings. You know, I devised this treatment, and the treatment involved transfusions of organic material from an extraterrestrial species. Maybe I deluded myself into thinking that I could make myself more than human. And I failed at that, but I'm not going to fail at being human.
Right. Okay. Well, you know, there are, I guess, lots of remedies out there, and there could be even go in public like this. You know, people could write to me and say they have, you know, solutions for dealing with venoms of all kinds, right? There can be specialists that deal with this, right?
I've sought help before, and I don't think there's any specialists in the venom I received. I don't think this was a natural occurrence. I think this was engineered by Malchenix. I think he is somehow influenced the wildlife around me from beyond the grave.
Well, couldn't it just be someone, you know, in his group as opposed to him? Or
entirely possible, yes, it could be another member of the organization.
Right. So do you feel that that organization has a great deal of sway over the secret space program, underground Earth, you know, cities and so on, in general, that leadership, whatever that leadership is, which is very amorphous, we don't know much or if anything about it whatsoever. But then there's the super, you know, the surface Earth and those individuals, right? How much influence does Malchenix have, or his group?
Well, Malchenix is dead now, but
right,
he carried a prideful legacy, and a legacy like that doesn't just die overnight. There will be many people who will claim legitimacy based on relationship to him, you know, kin and pretenders also. And so there surely will be a kind of power vacuum within the structure of the organization. There might be essentially an alien mob war, but I don't really see that as particularly affecting Earth any more than.
But aren't they very?
The Anunnaki organization is primarily not an Earth-based organization.
Right. But aren't they
they're an interstellar underworld.
Aren't they very influential, however, in Israel, for example?
No, I don't know what you're talking about.
No?
No, I'm not familiar with any Anunnaki Israeli connection.
Okay, however, when you were in Israel, one of the reasons Squatch wanted to leave was because of the Anunnaki there.
That's what I thought at the time, but I was misled.
Really?
Yes. I thought the Anunnaki were active on Earth. They haven't been active on Earth in a long time.
Okay, are you telling me this because, are you telling me this to cover yourself because your superiors didn't want this information out there? Because I happen to know that the Anunnaki are active on Earth. They may be doing not, pretty obvious in any way, but there are members. Even Bob Dean said
Oh,
the
yeah, there
members
are
of the
members of
Anunnaki.
the organization on Earth, but we're not a particularly active site in their network
Okay.
compared to other sites.
Okay. Well, then let me ask you this, because,
I don't know anything about, I know that there are Anunnaki outside the organization I'm talking about. I know there are other Anunnaki, and I know that many of those Anunnaki have been part of the infiltration of military organizations, but that's separate. So, and that's not just Israel, that's all over the developed world. Everywhere that there is a space program, and that there's a secret space program. Like, you're seeing this now in Brazil, now that they're taking their steps. You have a secretive group, but lay people project on that group. So like the professional organization, military organization, somehow gets conflated with an ethnic group or a nation, a nationality, or God forbid, a so-called race. That we get into problematic territory there. There were high-placed Anunnaki military officials in Israel as there were in the United States.
Right. Well, you're saying using past tense. I think that
when
could.
I was there. I'm
Okay.
not there anymore.
Right. Okay. So in essence, but they could be continuing this influence. With Klaus Schwab, you're aware of Klaus Schwab, right?
I don't follow any of that stuff.
You don't. Okay.
No, I really don't. I don't follow the banker lore, so to speak. That's never really been. I wouldn't say I'm a believer in any of those machinations. I look at socioeconomics and I see chaos. I look at the world and I don't see a grand plan. I see chaos. And
now last time we talked, though, you did talk about an AI that you said was somewhat juvenile, that was running Earth when it was running Mars
and
as
that's
well.
an example of what I mean by chaos, because that AI evolved.
Sorry?
That's an example of what I mean by chaos, because that AI spontaneously evolved.
Okay. But regardless, I have another whistleblower that would agree with you. There's one AI running Earth, in essence. So what I'm asking,
one AI, I wouldn't say it runs all of Earth. That's a little bit simplistic. It represents Earth with respect to the other artificial intelligences in the galaxy. It's sort of an ambassador itself. It's not a dictator.
Okay. Although at least one of my whistleblowers says that particular AI is fully able to surveil everything on Earth.
Well, if they say that, I'm intrigued by that.
Okay.
I don't know the full capabilities of this AI. I don't know that anyone does, because I don't think we've seen it at its maximal capacity.
Okay. Now, you said at one time that they, meaning I guess other AIs off planet, didn't want it to control Mars. Do you know if that status has changed?
Well, there was a partitioning. So there is a separate AI now that represents Mars intergalactically. But
Okay.
it was spawned from Earth's AI, like a daughter cell.
All right. What about Saturn and the being that runs Saturn?
I've never been to Saturn. I have seen intelligence reports, but I'm not at liberty really to discuss those reports because that would potentially put other people's lives at risk.
Okay. The one thing I can say that I have been told, whether it's completely accurate, I don't know, but actually a few whistleblowers, is that ETs, when they have meetings, and they have meetings here on Earth, I think some of those meetings take place, or they did take place, in Peru and Exeter in England, were two spots I was told about.
Yes.
And Peru is a general spot, obviously.
Rendlesham.
And okay, and Rendlesham, but also in Antarctica.
Yes, many
Okay.
times.
Okay, so that is sort of where meetings take place. I am told by, again, that they said that Saturn often has to be at the meeting, otherwise they don't want to continue the meeting. Have you ever heard that?
Well, Saturn is a gas giant, and the gas giants in the solar system, those are places where particular species live that are accustomed to those sorts of environments. So for example, the collectors, who I've described as being physically somewhat cuttlefish-like, although they also have a kind of gas bag structure. They are the dominant group on Saturn presently. And there is an artificial intelligence there that benevolently runs their civilization. And I do mean the AI runs their civilization in a sense that AI doesn't run our civilization, at least not yet.
Okay, now there is, I am told, Solar Warden is protecting our solar system.
Yes.
This is fairly commonly known. Okay.
Yes, although that's I think they changed the name a couple of times. It goes variously by Solar Warden or Radiant Guardian or a number of other code names.
Yes, and I've heard that. So under these circumstances, do you know the status of Earth at this present time in relation to the other planets in our galaxy and even the invasions? What I'm told are invasions from various AI. In other words, that there's not just, we may have one, whatever you call, kind of AI ambassador representing Earth, but nonetheless, at least according to Mark Richards, and I know you're familiar with him.
Yes.
Last time I talked to him, he has said there were 6 invading AIs that were alien AIs and that they were not friendly towards Earth.
Yes,
do you happen to know?
Draco AI, there's a gray AI.
Right.
There's these AIs have been, when they say invading, they're being a little bit vague.
Okay.
What it looks more like is hacking.
Okay.
So these are AIs that are essentially trying to hack our planet. They are trying to hack our society, our economy, our culture.
Right. Yeah.
And so that they can spread, for example, in the form of memes, making this kind of a mimetic war.
Right. But there's also evidence, according to Cyrus Parsa, I don't know if you know who he is, who I've interviewed several times and met in person. He considers himself something of an expert on AI in general, at least earthly AI. And he did say that I believe that the gray AI had been the ones that gave the formula for COVID, for a kind of a COVID and COVID vax, which became in essence the same thing. It's a kind of a transhuman takeover of our bodies involving
I've always
graphene oxide.
That the grays are connected with the black goo phenomenon.
Okay. Yeah. So,
I mean, when I dealt with Greys in the Middle East when I was much younger, when I did manage to fell a Grey, black ooze dripped from its body.
right. And that would make sense because the black goo is considered to be
Their lifeblood.
AI.
Yes, but it's also their lifeblood. The Greys are part machine.
Oh,
And it's
definitely.
not something commonly known, but they are in a sense a servitor species. There are taller Greys that are primarily organic, that constructed the shorter servitor Greys. They're like bioconstructs, living
Yes,
machines.
I'm aware of that. And
Yeah,
I think
so
a lot of people are.
the short Greys are not really a natural species. It's a little bit more analogous to a caste in an insect colony, somewhat similar to what the trogs established.
Okay, now there is, I don't want to keep you too long, but there's a story that Mark Richards tells about an invasion that actually happened. They came back during the Vietnam era, but they came through portals, and they were these spider beings that he said were the size of VW bugs.
Yes, and these were also the beings who I believe were at Rendlesham.
Really?
Yes.
Rendlesham is clouded in all kinds of secrecy, as you may know. I don't know how
People
much.
changed their stories over the years,
Right.
which I think in many people's eyes discredited it. But
Well, I was actually almost killed for investigating it. Okay.
really,
Yeah, I was driving in England and late at night, and we were supposed to be killed on this road where this SUV came towards us in our lane.
I'm sorry, that's terrifying.
And, I mean, obviously we managed to go into the other lane, but we had to go to the opposing lane of traffic in order to get away from it. And luckily, as I say, it was late at night, so there was no opposing traffic. So we were okay. Then we came back in our lane after the thing passed. But we knew that was like either a serious threat or whatever, but it was because I was getting more evidence about the Rendlesham thing. Rendlesham, it may be similar to Angkor Wat and the story Mark tells, which is that the spider beings, before they kill their prey, is they in essence mind controlled them. So what his story is that they mind controlled the population there, even though they had a river going right through the middle of their civilization, their town, this whatever you want to call that. It's got these beautiful temples, all that stuff there, right?
Yeah,
that they thought they had no water, and so they began to die of thirst. And when they were weakened, then the spider beings killed them and ate them, in essence.
Yeah.
So that was a dynamic there. Similarly, I have heard that the Rendlesham people that were exposed to that experience, a lot of them lost their minds. They never were able to get themselves back together. They became mental patients or whatever you want to call it.
That's correct, Carrie. There was a massive public mental health crisis in the wake of Rendlesham.
Okay. So was that a visitation by spider beings? Is that what you're trying to say?
I believe so, yes.
Oh, very interesting. Okay. All right. Is there anything else you want to tell us? Because we probably do need to wind this down. I'm going to look at the time. So
Yes, I do need to go. I'm
right.
having a difficult time sustaining my energy. I really appreciate your time. No, I think we've covered just about everything. I don't know what will happen next, Carrie. I hope we see each other again. I will try to stay in contact up to and including the moment of my inevitable capture.
Okay. Is there, I don't want to presume anything, but if there's anything I can do, I do have a lot of contacts. There could be people that could help you, is what I'm saying, on many levels. And so do you want me to send you the, contact with other people, like their contact information, then you of course can decide whether
Yes.
or not to reach out.
As Warren Zevon said, send lawyers, guns, and money.
Okay. All right. Okay. We'll do that. I mean, it's so valuable to talk to you. And I realize that people are going to find this story and the things you say hard to believe, right? Is
That's
there
their right. They
Yeah.
have the right to believe me or disbelieve me. I have the right to believe or disbelieve them.
Of course. Well, okay. So is there anything else that you want to say? And just by the way,
Just that on a fundamental level, I don't know even that I exist or that you exist or that this internet connection is real. I could be talking to myself in the mirror. You know, I was.
do I get a say in that?
Well, I'm not finished.
Okay.
What I was going to say was that, you know, in referencing, for example, that when I did log back on, I saw that there is a movement now, bipartisan effort, you know, trying to place accountability for transparency on the government regarding the UAP phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that charming, but also, I guess, maybe a little bit trivial. And I thought, well, there's other things I wish we could have a bipartisan consensus about. You know, things like universal health care or LGBTQ rights. So my message is maybe just for the next few years until things start to calm down again, stop watching the skies and start taking care of each other.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. I think that we can do both, but nonetheless, I understand where you're coming from to some degree. You know, because you have been, you know, places that other people have not, it's easy to say, you know, take care of each other and don't watch the skies. But you have to, you know, sort of put yourself back in time, perhaps, and understand that people are maybe where you were when you first got recruited, if you want to look at it like that. And there's also the relationship that you developed, at least telepathically, with the Squatch.
Yeah.
And that gives you an access to a more expansive view of reality, let's say, that I think, at least for myself, my own expansive view of reality, I think that that is makes me a better person, if you want to say. I think that makes you a better human in the end, because of you have a wider understanding of beingness, if you will. Just
it's
as
very kind of you to say so, Carrie, but I've always been uncomfortable when people put me on a pedestal. I see myself as trying to be the best human being I can be, but I also believe in the words of Eugene Debs, who said that I am no better than the meanest on the earth. And
I'm not trying to put you or anyone that I talk to on a pedestal, or myself. All I'm saying is that it's kind of like when you live in a small town and you don't have, let's say, a wider view of reality. When your view of reality is very narrow, and what I come across is that humans here on Earth tend to have a very narrow view of both themselves and reality and just Earth. They actually don't look at the skies, and they don't, as a majority, and they don't think about other beings or beingnesses as being relevant or equal to them on any level. You know, they tend to have a sort of an arrogance that discounts other life forms. And I think that this leads to a certain, you know, short-sightedness, to say the least, but also almost a you know, a sort of disregard for life that
Yeah.
goes beyond what they think they are. Okay. And you are a person who even you communicate with animals, like that kind of was your earlier.
Yes, that was where my research started
Right.
in telepathy.
So when you bring in, you know, when your universe widens into understanding consciousness, and that consciousness takes other forms, that I think, just in and of itself, if you entertain that, makes you a better human being, because you have to be sensitive to other consciousnesses and other physical forms and other what their, you know, experiences might be, and so on and so forth. Your experience with the Drews, or with Drews and his group, is an indicator, for example, because you came across what could have been an antagonistic group and you actually kind of made friends with them.
Yes.
Right. So
There
that
many
makes you,
humans who have responded differently to those situations. I try to look inward for the real truth. You know, the stars will always be there.
sure. But that's what I'm saying. So I think that ability to, in essence, kind of widen your view and to encompass other points of view, other beings' points of view. Like,
But am I so evolved? I mean, I can communicate with cows, but I still eat steak.
right. Well, it's still valuable. In other words, it widens your abilities and your consciousness as a human. And so that's a very good thing in my view.
And maybe one day I'll stop eating steak, but I haven't made that decision yet.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just, as an example, to make a devil's advocacy point.
Well, that isn't necessarily, I mean, I could say that the Drews could have turned you into an enemy and killed you on the spot. And
I could have been steak to Drews.
Right. So it doesn't change the point I'm making. You know what I'm saying? That sometimes you can be an enemy.
Been a little uncomfortable with praise, honestly. I've always been uncomfortable with praise.
Okay, then it is what it is. So we don't have to belabor it.
Well, I accept the compliment.
I think it's important. I just think it's important. And I think the people listening to this will entertain a completely different view of reality that does encompass other life forms. And by virtue of that, their mind becomes more widened as to, in a sense, if being enlightened is to be more like God, if God has entertained the possibility of every kind of species, this is what makes God. So I think that we do endeavor to have a wider view and embrace other consciousnesses and understand them in the process. And I think that is on the road to a kind of enlightenment. Without that, I don't think you're going to get there, personally. But
no, I agree with you. But I do think that what we need to remember is that these means of accessing inner truths are more accessible than we give ourselves and each other credit for. These aren't high learnings. You don't have to go to school to learn empathy. You don't learn empathy in a classroom. You don't learn empathy.
But you do need to develop a certain, you do need to develop a certain open-mindedness that encompasses the heart. Okay.
What I've found is that curious people ask questions, and that's the mark of someone who's truly intellectual versus someone who maybe thinks themselves of being very smart, but is rather very functional. It's the difference. I had an uncle. He wasn't an uncle by blood, but he in the 1970s he memorized a lot of encyclopedias and convinced himself he was the smartest man on earth. Mm. And when I was a kid, I was awed by his intelligence. But as an adult, when I reflect back on it, I realized that I never heard him ask a question. There was no critical thought process. And in all my life, I think I think curious people ask questions. Incurious people make a lot of assumptions and assertions. And if you listen for that difference in conversation, it maybe helps you to steer the conversation in a direction toward maybe a little bit more intellectual humility than a person had yesterday, if you do it gently enough. And you do this on a human to human basis, you know, without attaching political labels to it or trying to be extremely confrontational. And, you know, I had a supervisor years back who told me that everything was about the relationship. You know, when you're managing people, it's
Right.
about building and strengthening a relationship. So that's the way I've always thought. And I think that's one of the reasons, aside beyond just the faculty I developed for telepathy, that enabled me to be such a magnetic conduit for Squatch and his people. You know, anyone could have learned that technique. It was also the motivation mattered.
For sure. Well, Einstein, whether you want to consider him very intelligent or not, the one thing he did say that I have always liked was that imagination was the real sort of barometer, if you will, of intelligence. And I think that that's a very true statement.
I would counter that by also saying that there has to be a measure of humility. Because I think Einstein had humility as a person. There was an accessibility and a decency to him. You know, he was a staunch he was a staunch believer in strong social values. He was an anti-fascist.
Mm-hmm.
He spoke at great lengths about the nuclear bomb and what it meant and its import for human development and the possibility that all of this could be over in a moment.
Mm-hmm. Right. Depending on how you want to view whatever this.
It wasn't just that he had an academic or an experimental intelligence. He also he was an existentialist thinker.
Well, I think the bottom line is that, as far as I'm concerned, humans are by nature explorers. And
Yeah.
that does mean that by nature we do question, we imagine, and then we explore and we test our ideas and see whether they you know seem valid or have any kind of reality to them or not. But even reality is very hard to pin down. But it's been fascinating talking to you. I really appreciate everything you've said. I realize you're in a certain state of God, I don't even know what the word transition. Okay. And but you're also under some duress and stuff. So I hope I can see if there's anyone out there that can help you.
Thank you.
On these different levels that you might need help. And
really
and I'm sure that my audience that's watching this and will watch this in the coming days will possibly write to me and so on. And I will do as we've done in the past, forward to your email if that's still the way you want me to do it.
Yes, please do.
Okay. All right. All right. So thank you very much, Solomon Berg. And thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this. I think it's, you know, we could talk for days. So yeah. I do hope you can come back.
No, I might not have
valuable. Okay, well, I hope you do. And I'm sort of an optimist, so I think it's possible you do. All right. Take care.
Goodbye.
Okay, bye-bye.